these websites for the SI2 research group, which has involved learning how to do charting libraries because they need their information to chart it. So, in this, I have researched into a wide variety of charting libraries. This is a small subset of them that I'm going to be going into, because if I went into all of them that I looked at, it would probably take a couple hours. And if I went into all of them, period, it would probably take days or something. Because there are a ton out there on the internet, and there are an equal number of people ranking them and comparing them, like I'm doing right now. So, here's to helping with the problem. So most plotting libraries run in JavaScript because JavaScript is nice. It runs on everyone's computer. Doesn't require any extra work from the server, and it's easy to make things interactive. I'm going to look at mostly JavaScript-based libraries. However, I did find one PHP library. It's not really as impressive as some of these JavaScript ones, but I included it because I wanted to include as many as I can. And I'm also going to look at Gnuplot, which is needing a Java update. Yeah, no, that's not that. Anyway, okay. So let's look at the huge list. Oh man, that's a lot. Looks a lot bigger on the big screen than it did on my tiny little screen. So D3 is going to be the first one I look at. D3 is this really nice low-level plotting library. It's free, it's open source, it's hard to use, it uses JavaScript, people have made it interactive, and it can do almost anything you want. For the examples that they provide, it can do bubble charts, chord diagrams, all kinds of different and interesting things. However, if we look at the example that I wrote, and this is on JSBin, which is a really nice website where you can write whatever JavaScript you want on the left here, and it'll output on the right. I was trying to make an easy x equals y graph here. However, following their examples, it creates this long, unreadable mess that I had trouble reading through. And all that just for this x equals negative y, actually negative 10y graph. I learned a lot about setting different sizes to the options, and if you want, you can just change these values as you're interested in, and then run it. Things will sometimes move and sometimes just.
So the move as soon as you change the number.
Oh, okay. So that is D3. If someone's ever going to use a graphing program for a school project, don't use D3. It's great, and you should use it if you are going to maybe do a really professional-looking thing. A lot of professional websites use D3, and a lot of the other things are wrappers around D3 because of how much it can do. Plotly, the second one up here, is the one I've done the most work in. We ended up looking at the whole list, and I would prune things so that they only had to compare 3 or 4. But Plotly was suggested by another fellow in SI2, And while it says premium on there, that is not for displaying the plots on your own website. That is instead for their extra above and beyond service where you can like click a plot and then open up the plot on their website and host plots on their website. However, there is a price to it. It is open source. It's on JavaScript. It's interactive, and it can do 3D. However, as I have had the most experience with Plotly, I know some of its problems, which I'll go into later. I feel like the code is a little bit easier to understand, but at the same time, it's probably not the easiest example. C3.js is another D3 wrapper. It's a little bit, it doesn't have a lot of the bells and whistles that a lot of these other charting libraries have. It doesn't have 3D. It mostly is reduced to like simple scatter plots and a few other types. The examples here are more like about line charts and bar charts, and they don't have those really nice, appealing to the eye charts where, oh, this is a really cool 3D chart where you can like move things around. If we just pick one of these, it is a very serviceable library, and it is quite simple to read, partially because it can't do all of that extra stuff that other libraries can do. The next one I'm looking at is called Matplotlib D3. And Matplotlib D3 is another wrapper around D3. We'll get through those first. But this one is aimed at emulating Matplotlib from Plotly. So if you're really used to dealing with Matplotlib, this one might be a very good charting algorithm or charting library for you to look at. These graphs might look like graphs that you've seen Matplotlib examples for. They are not as interactable as other options. However, there are a few things you can do, like clicking, dragging, zooming in, and things like that. But from the examples that I looked at, there wasn't a lot of like you hover over an item and then it like lights up and says, "This is my value. Here I am." And if that's something you're looking for, then there are other options. Google Charts is a really good free option. However, it isn't open source. All these other ones I've talked about so far, you can find the source, download it on your computer, so then you don't have to access the main website that it's held on each time you get it. However, Google hasn't offered that yet. So you can only get Google's code if you access it remotely. It is another more simple charting library, and it doesn't have as much 3D beautiful things, but it can be animated. It can do a lot of different things, and it is much simpler to deal with than a lot of these others. Yes?
How do you even use a library that's not open source?
I will open my example for Google Charts, which is open.
Yeah. Second, right.
Okay, so should have asked how much. At the top here, in a JavaScript, you have this line, which finds a source from the internet, and whenever you open that page, it requests that source for the code concerning the JavaScript. In others, you could save it on in the same folder as your website, and then you wouldn't have to have your clients or your users access that other page, and it would just all go through your page. It would mean that if they take theirs down, you still have yours, and it still works. But at the same time, this is the way Google does it.
What prevents you from just doing a web get and you get that source?
I don't know, it's a good question.
But even if you did get it, I imagine it would be, I imagine at the very least it would be minified, be completely unreadable, changing all variables from one letter to the other.
I just did that, so you can get it.
You get it on the inside, okay.
Google lets you, is quite simple to use, in my opinion, but at the same time, if you want the control over the source code in case you find some error, you can't get that same control with the Google option. There is other, as you can see, it's quite easy just to input different numbers in your data, set the different options. There are many more options than this, and for a lot of these options, most of these will have like default values that'll just fill in for you, and those are what get you, because when you want to do something that isn't the default value, you have to figure out if you actually can change the default value. But that is Google Charts. The next thing I'm going to look at is Charts.js, which is another simple, Charts.js is another JavaScript charting library. This is another simple one which maybe isn't as exact as you might be interested in. It seems very aimed towards being visually pleasing, but not necessarily aimed towards showing exact values. With like this example here, I can't get the exact values of these points at all, which I would think would be a really useful thing to have if you want to actually show off your data, as opposed to maybe just saying, look at this nice curve, it looks like this curve, everything's looking great. Oh, we have really high profits. Look, during this season, that looks really nice, but if people want to know the actual values, this doesn't show it as well as other options. Pie charts is a paid-for graphing option. However, you only have to pay for it if you have a commercial, if you're doing something commercial, if you're doing education, or you're just using it on your own. They say it's free. However, it has a lot of the bells and whistles that Plotly does, but instead of aiming towards a more scientific setup, it's aiming more towards, this is good. Well, parts of it are scientific, but it's aiming towards more like a business-oriented thing. It has an offshoot called High Stock, which is aimed specifically towards financial data, and that can be really useful to use something that presumably companies actually do use for their financial data. But while it does have a lot of the nice positives of a library with more like money behind it. It does cost money for commercial use, so just be aware of that if you decide to use it. The next one I'm going to look at is called Flot. Flot was made by a man who was like, you know what? All these other ones aren't giving me all these other charting libraries are not giving me what I need. I need a library that can do all that. That I need with scatter plots, and it does scatter plots. And it has plugins that you can install to do a large variety of things. A basic example would start with this, and you might look at that and go, well, a lot of these other programs could do this and more without adding anything. But the idea behind Flot was this one has a zooming and panning plugin installed into it, so then you can add the functionality you need in a piecemeal way instead of getting it all in one go. That means that it's also a little bit harder to deal with, because what if you want to add panning and you're like, well, I have to find the plugin for it, and the plugin has to work with everything else I've got set up. And one thing could lead to another, and it could be very difficult, but one of the problems I'm going to go into, Flot actually solved quite nicely, where you needed 2 x-axes. It solved it while having a whole lot of other issues. I seem to be running through time much faster than I was imagining. Canvas.js is another option that is paid for. I don't think it's as nice as HighCharts, but it's also there with examples that have nice animations and interactivity as it's needed. But again, it does a lot of the same stuff everything else has been doing up to here. Fusion Chartist is another free one that a lot of people were suggesting, but this is another one of those where it's probably good for small numbers, but if you have too many, suddenly the trees get lost for the forest, and you can't tell exactly what the values might be, because it doesn't have that hover and, hey, this is my value information. P-chart here, I'm skipping over diagrams because I want to speak to this, is our PHP option, and it does not have a example page. I wish it did. Since it's running in PHP, it doesn't have any interactivity. It acts just like here's a image, deal with it. Which, maybe that's what you need, but there are other options where you can just create an image and have people deal with it. And the image might be more to your liking, and it doesn't have the price point that P-chart has. Gnuplot is the last one I'm looking at, and it's sort of a separate scripting language-based charting library. It also creates a plot and then exports it as a PNG to the website. However, there is a plugin for it that makes it more interactable with panning and zooming. But again, it doesn't have the pop thing. But it's really nice because I have it downloaded on my computer, and you can just open up the example and just start like plotting sine functions and cosine functions, and it doesn't seem to have a lot of the. And if you really want something and you don't want to mess with someone else's complicated graphs because, oh, they're changing the defaults on you and you don't know what's happening, this could be really useful. So I create a file with some x equals y data, and then I can just plot the data right here. And that's kind of what it looks like. For Plotly, this is an example of x equals y on Plotly. I don't think I showed that. And just the last little bit of time, I'm going to show you one of the biggest problems I've had with Plotly. So we want two axes that are related. So it's temperature and 1 over temperature. And we want those two values to both be visible above and below the graph. So one option we had was changing all of the x values with a string which had the temperature and the 1 over temperature value on there. And that worked all right as long as all of the points were equally spaced. Because the instant you got a non-equally spaced point, it would confuse the slope, because since it's treating these all as strings, it would set them equally apart because it doesn't know the difference between 0.5 over 2000 and 1 over 1000 other than they're both strings. And if you added them in the wrong order, it would just append the string at the end, and then you would have this situation where 1.5 is above 10, but there's a line because that's how the graph is pointed out, and it would not look very good. If you had two x-axes like this, you can move this x-axis so that the 0 points aren't the same. And then, okay, how useful is that? 10 does not equal 0, or we zoom in and zoom out, and suddenly it goes from 0 to 10 down here, and it goes from 0 to 6 up here, because it doesn't zoom out at the same time whenever you zoom out the page. Because it just doesn't. So in the end, if you're curious, we decided a version like this where we change the ticks for strings after the fact. But if you have too many ticks down here, it looks really bad because it only allows you, if you change the ticks for strings, to either show all of the ticks or none of the ticks. So in the end, we edited it so that it shows none of the ticks but has this last solution, because that's what worked. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes. You raise your hand first.
So what do you recommend? What do you prefer? Which one?
At the moment, I use Plotly most because it has, while it does have a lot of strange problems, it's I've dealt with it, and it has a lot of basics that that work in there. It depends on what you're looking for, which is why I brought all these to the table. If you want interactivity, then what you're looking for is probably also depends on what else. If you're not looking for interactivity at all, I'd probably go with Gnuplot because it gives you a whole lot of power over the data, but it doesn't seem to bog it down with a lot of JavaScript. Because JavaScript can be kind of tough to deal with. If you're looking for interactivity, then you might want to do Google Charts, unless, of course, Google Charts doesn't support the specific type of plot you're looking at which point you want to look at whatever does support the plot you're looking at. Maybe it's Plotly, maybe it's Matplotlib. If you're going from Python to JavaScript, I'd use Matplotlib D3 together like that. But in the end, the best option depends on what your use case is. So it's hard to say. D3 might be the best option if you're making something for a long, that's supposed to be there for a long period of time, and it needs to look exactly like this. And it needs to have this interactivity. But that's going to take a long time to set up, as opposed to Gnuplot, or again, Google Charts, or a lot of these other options where it just sort of fits together after you put in a couple lines of code. So I have trouble answering your question because all of these have a place, because none of them solve all of the use cases. If there was one that solved all the use cases, I bet someone would come up with a new use case that it didn't solve. Dr. Fink?
Yeah, if you've got a situation where new data keeps coming in, you want to keep adding it to the graph, what would you recommend? I guess let's say I want to have a bar graph or something very simple, but it's got to keep up with my data, and I want to be able to zoom in on places.
I've done that with Plotly itself, or I can imagine how that is done with Plotly itself. I can like, change the number of things. I don't remember which one right now, but one of them had a specific example of data that was entering, and I'm sorry I don't remember which one. I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Okay, that is possible, at least
Yes.
in one of these.
Yes. And I think several of them. I wouldn't be surprised if high charts did it, but then if whatever you're using it for turned from student to commercial, you have to change everything you're working on. Or
What's
pay.
that pay?
Yes.
How expensive are they?
It can be a lot of money. High charts, I think, is probably one of the most expensive ones, and it is hiding how much it costs.
I think there's a buy button at the top.
Oh yeah, I don't want to buy it though. Oh, my cart is empty.
Oh, it's okay.
Okay. A couple $100, and usually it charges monthly or yearly.
All right, so it's a recurring cost. All right, well, if you ever want to actually try one of these, you know who to turn to, and I'm sure they'll be glad to show you any examples there.
And this website I made, it's not the most useful, but it's up on my local account.
Well, great. What I can do is you can send that to me, and I can add that as information on the Keeping Current website, so people can just go to it.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I want to remind you, the food, there's still one little thing left, supplied by the industrial partners. And next week, do come. You'll hear undergraduate